I probably very easily could have gotten stuck right there.
Yeah.
In some kind of vicious cycle of wrestling with this pain and never being able to move beyond it. And I think I was ready, maybe because of the pain. I was open to this concept, but it wasn't just an openness, and it wasn't just the right timing. It was what I needed to then heal and move beyond where I was at that moment.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast. I am Ryan Franklin, and I would love for you to join me every week as we explore leadership topics that will help you get the clarity needed to move your organization forward. Just hit the subscribe button and the bell to get notified as soon as I post a new session. And before we get started, I do want to mention that I have a great product called the Christian Leader Blueprint. It's a solid model for leadership development to help you establish a better rhythm of life, to see yourself more clearly, to leverage your strengths, and build more productive relationships. And I want to give it to you as my free gift. You can go to ryanfranklin.org and you can download the short guide for free today. And without any further delay, let's get to our session. I'm so excited today to have on the podcast a close friend of mine, Michael Ensey. And let me tell you a little bit about Michael. He's the senior pastor of Christian Life Center in Heath, Ohio, where he has served for the past 5 years. He is also the chairman of the board for Urshan College and Urshan Graduate School of Theology, and the secretary for the UPCI Office of Education and Endorsement. Prior to his pastorate, he served for 15 years in organizational leadership, 8 of those years as a youth ministries executive for UPCI, including the national youth president for 4 of those years. He has a bachelor's degree in theology from Texas Bible College and a master's degree in theology from UGST. And most importantly to him, he would say that he is the husband of an amazing wife, Rebecca, and the father of Lincoln, Grant, and Avery. Wow, Michael, that's quite a resume that you have. And with all of that said, I just want to say welcome to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. It is such a privilege to be with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I am very grateful, first of all, for our friendship. And there are those connections that we make in the kingdom of God that from the very beginning, you know that it is God ordained and that it's going to be an important relationship in your life. And I've felt that about our friendship and connection from the very beginning. And so thank you, first of all, for your friendship. Thank you for your investment in me. I've been the blessed recipient of many of your resources, and I'm so excited about the Christian Leader Made Simple product line that you are producing, resources that are helping us all to become greater leaders. I've been blessed to experience your executive coaching expertise. And so thank you for that. I can certainly recommend Ryan to every listener out there today. Check out his resources, not just the podcast, the website, all of the resources that he's making available. And it's helping us as a faith movement. It's helping us as the kingdom of God to move forward as more effective leaders. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for having me on today.
And thank you for those kind words. I'll put the check in the mail as we finish today.
That'll work.
So obviously, Michael, you've had tons of leadership experience from the corporate level to the local church and several different positions within the local church, and I've personally witnessed the phenomenal results of your leadership on the local level in Heath, Ohio. And I know personally that that kind of success, it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come without sacrifice and without personal growth. And so I've invited you on today to the show to just continue a conversation that I actually started last week with Adam Shaw on capacity. And I think the three of us started studying this topic and really dove into this topic at kind of about the same time. And so with that said, can you tell me a little bit about why you're so passionate about this topic of capacity? And then let's talk about maybe a little bit of the connection of capacity between you, Adam, and I.
Absolutely. It really started for me a couple of years ago. I was a new pastor, and I had brought in Stan Gleason to speak to our church. He had written a book, Follow to Lead, about discipleship and some really neat, interesting, unique concepts of discipleship, I think, for the church at that time, that evangelism and discipleship were not separate concepts, that really we accomplish evangelism through discipleship. And so I taught this discipleship series, and I brought Stan Gleason in to help me finish that series. He taught the final lesson talking about a disciple is a disciple maker. And so in the course of bringing him in and us having several conversations and meals that we were able to share together, he said something in one of those meals that it really kind of rocked me to the core. It shook me as a new pastor. I was not even a full year into my pastorate here at Christian Life Center in Heath. And we're having this conversation, and he says something to me that really, I couldn't even sleep that night. I was consumed with this concept of capacity. He said, after 30 years of pastoring and 40 years of ministry, that he had come to this realization that at the end of his life, the sum result of his influence, his impact in individual lives and the kingdom of God, and really the impact of his church locally and even globally, would be the direct result of his individual leadership capacity, that who he was as a leader and how he was able to influence other leaders and how they would influence others, that individual leadership capacity would ultimately determine the sum of his life and influence and impact. And so when he makes this statement, and I sit back thinking, I'm in my first year as a pastor, it really challenged me in that moment. And I started what I feel like has been a journey of self-discovery as it relates to capacity. I've asked myself and really started asking myself these questions that night, that what is capacity? If it's that important, I need to know what capacity is. I need to know how I increase it. How do I maximize my capacity? How do I make the most of it? And ultimately, how do I fulfill my potential as it relates to my capacity? That when I'm 30 years down the road pastoring and 40 years of ministry, I want to be able to look back and feel like I have fulfilled that potential as it relates to capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge for any of us younger pastors, leaders that are wanting to move forward. We want to be able to look back one day when we're in the rocking chair and look at our life and say, you know what, that was a life well lived. We don't want to be sitting there with regret. And I think that's what this capacity thing is all about. It's increasing to the full potential that the Lord wants for our life. So the connection between me, you, and Adam on this subject, kind of talk through that a little bit, if you don't mind. That was an interesting
Absolutely.
time.
After that conversation that I had with Stan Gleason, I started calling my friends, and I started reaching out and talking to them about this concept. It had so challenged me. And I really think for me, it had helped to crystallize something that I had felt throughout my life and my ministry, something that was propelling me forward, motivating me, moving me to try to be the best that I could be and within my potential. And I think this concept of capacity helped to bring so many things into focus that I had been attempting to do, but maybe really didn't know exactly what it was I was doing or how I was going to get there. And it helped to really almost like focusing a laser. It helped me to really zero in on, okay, this is what I need to do. And this is what I need to focus on in order to accomplish those goals and dreams and the things that are out there ahead of me. So I started calling friends, and a couple of really close friends of mine. Some of them are good friends of yours. I called Jason Staten And I talked to Jason, tremendous leader, pastor, and one of my best friends for 20 years now. And I talked to him about this concept and started sharing, and he was sharing with me some thoughts. And I called LJ Harry, who pastors just 45 miles north of me in Mount Vernon, Ohio, and was talking to him about the concept of capacity. And he asked me, he said, "Have you listened to Adam Shaw's podcast?" And I said, "No, I've listened to it before, but I haven't listened to it, just recently, or what are you referring to?" And he said, "Well, he just did a podcast on capacity." And so I'm like, "Oh man, I got to talk to him." So I call up Adam and we start to talk, and he's sharing things with me that are similar concepts. 2 Kings chapter 4 is one of the passages that maybe we'll talk about today that really became a foundational passage for me when it comes to principles of life and ministry and leadership related to capacity. And so we're talking about these similar concepts, and I was sharing things with him that God had given me. And so we talk, and in that same time frame, I think maybe even the same week, you called me and you were telling me about a lesson you had just taught. I think John Maxwell's lesson on leadership lid, and it is a lesson on capacity. That's what it's all about, that your followers will never rise above the level of your leadership and capacity. And so it connected us. And I think I told you about Adam and his podcast, and we started to talk. And from there, I think from those conversations we had, Adam ended up recording another podcast that took it a step further from just individual capacity to organizational capacity. And so over the past few years, there certainly has been a connection between me and you and Adam, not just our friendship, but this pursuit to understand capacity, to increase it, and ultimately to help others. And that's what we're about in ministry. And true leadership is to be able to inspire others to fulfill their potential.
Absolutely. And obviously we're recording last week's podcast. We're recording this week's podcast on capacity to help others. And with that said, just out of curiosity from your perspective, how would you define capacity and even potential in a person's life?
Well, let's start with maybe some basic concepts. Then we can perhaps dig a little bit deeper over the next few moments. To me, and this is my own personal understanding as I've tried to wrap my mind and my heart around this concept, that capacity is a current known limiting factor. Now, that's not limiting in a bad sense. It's just a reality that right now, my current capacity, it's a present reality that represents, I believe it represents our effectiveness in knowing ourselves and our effectiveness in leading others, because a leader has to be able to see something and then share that with somebody else that will inspire them to pursue something maybe that they can't even see. And so this effectiveness in leadership is about understanding and knowing ourselves, and then being able to communicate the vision, dreams, purpose, mission that we're feeling to others. So I think maybe we'll understand a little bit better when we talk about the practical application of this concept. But for me, that's what capacity is. It's this present reality, this current known limiting factor. It's where I am right now.
Right now.
Right now.
So with that said, and I think we will get into the details of it a little bit more. I would like to anyway. If considering where we are right now, if I desire to enlarge that capacity, what would enlarging capacity look like in your world?
Well, I think this is where potential comes into play in this concept. That potential is this unknown capacity that is beyond me. I haven't attained it yet. So capacity is where I am. It's who I am. And then potential is where I'm going. It's who I hope to be. And so I think that for me, I've defined potential as this unrealized capacity. I haven't experienced it yet. I haven't attained it yet. So in order to enlarge that capacity, first of all, we have to know where we're going. And I think understanding our personal purpose is one of those things that is so absolutely critical. If we don't know what our purpose is, then we don't know where we're going, and we'll
So
never
true.
know when we arrive at that destination. So I think there's got to be some introspective work that is done first to understand ourselves and understand our personal purpose and calling. What is our mission that God has called us to? And when we understand that, we know where the destination is, then we can put some of the practical principles into place that will help us to arrive at that place, that place of realized potential, which ultimately is going to be increased capacity. So I think this is where First Chronicles chapter 4 came into play for me, the prayer of Jabez. This was something I'd heard his prayer many times. I'd never really focused a lot on what that one phrase that he prays, that prayer of expanding my territory. But First Chronicles 4:10, the prayer of Jabez, Lord, that you would bless me and expand my territory, be with me in all that I do, and keep me from all trouble and pain. The Bible says that God granted his request. And so as I started to dive into this concept of capacity, I went to this passage, and that phrase, expand my territory, really jumped out at me that, okay, number one, it's appropriate to desire to increase our capacity. It's okay. We don't have to feel convicted that I'm being ambitious because I want to. No, it's not. It's not selfish. Now, there are certainly those people that are selfish, and that's why they want to increase their capacity. But if we understand our true purpose in God, and that's what we're pursuing, then it's okay and appropriate to have this desire to increase our capacity. And then the Bible says God granted him his request. So I believe that it is the will of God for us to increase our capacity. God answered that prayer for Jabez. So that was a starting point for me that I just felt this release. Like, okay, maybe this is what I've been searching for. This is what I've been trying to find to help clarify how I am able to fulfill my purpose in God. This is it. I've got to increase my capacity. It's okay to desire it. God wants me to, and God's going to help me if I'll allow him.
Very good. And with that said, in regards to you personally, obviously you've grown in capacity in the last 5 years as a senior pastor. Things have shifted in your mind. What is, in regards to how capacity looked, or your view of it, and the way you pursued it back then a few years ago, compared to the way it looks now and the way you're pursuing it now, how has that changed and shifted over the past few years?
Well, I mentioned a few moments ago that I think capacity was something that was moving me along, this concept, but it really hadn't crystallized for me. I didn't really understand it. Didn't have a lot of clarity about it, even though there was a lot of motivation and desire and passion and all of these things that were working to move me forward. And in a moment, I want us to talk about the practical application. We'll get there in kind of a framework that I felt like God had given me. But in the pursuit of understanding this capacity, I think that I had placed a lot of emphasis maybe on the spiritual development and the spiritual nature of what we do, and not as much understanding on the practical application, what I needed to do. I think I had prayed a lot of prayers, just like Jabez did, God, expand my territory. But I think there were probably some things that took place between his prayer and God answering his prayer that are in the white space of Scripture. There was probably some personal responsibility that Jabez had. And I think that's where 2 Kings chapter 4 is a passage that I really dug into. And this is where Adam Shaw's done a lot of great work. I won't reiterate some things that he shared with me, but one of the greatest truths, I think, out of this passage in 2 Kings 4, talking about the widow. She's lost her husband, who was a man of God. She has 2 sons. She's in debt. She's hopeless. And through this, she appeals to the prophet and he gives her some instruction. Take what you have in your house, which she felt like was nothing. That was her response in the beginning, just a cruse of oil. Take what you have in the house. You got to use what you have. But then outside of your home, there are some vessels that you need to acquire. So understanding capacity, I think there's two elements of us using what we have, that which is within us, and then reaching outside of ourselves. Those vessels came from their family, their neighbors that were around them. And so there's an understanding of this twofold dynamic that's at work here, that we have within ourselves what we need to initiate this journey toward the fulfillment of capacity. But it's not going to end with us. That we'll never fulfill our potential if we just try to use our own ability, experience, knowledge, wisdom. We'll never reach our potential. But beyond us, without, so connecting with others, that's where we acquire the vessels that are going to be filled with oil that ultimately are going to increase our capacity. And so I think my mindset began to shift from just the spiritual pursuit to the practical pursuit, that I can't just pray about my capacity, that I've got to work my capacity, that I can't just ask God to do it. He's not just going to download things into my brain. I'm going to have to actually study. He's not just going to make things happen. If I want to learn a new language, I'm going to have to go learn that language. If I want to get a master's degree, I'm going to have to pay for it, and I'm going to have to study, and I'm going to have to earn that degree. So there's some practical things that I need to do that it can create some space ultimately where God can work to fulfill that prayer. God, expand my territory, expand my capacity. It's my practical application, it's lifestyle disciplines every day, the things that I do that ultimately create the space that God can fill. And I believe that God will fill the space that we make available to him. I think that's the miracle of 2 Kings 4. As long as they were empty vessels, the oil kept flowing. So God's going to fill that space that we make available to him. We have as much of God as we want right now. We have as much of him in our lives as we desire. I don't think he's holding himself back. So it's through our investment, through diligent effort, through daily disciplines, spiritual disciplines, through all of those things that we ultimately expand our capacity that enables God to work within it.
Yeah. And I love how you brought out the point that, it's our initiatives. We have to take initiative. We have to get up and pray. We have to get up and go exercise. We have to get up and read a book. We have to make time for these things in order to grow and increase our capacity. I was talking to my brother yesterday about the fact that, some people, in fact, I would venture to say that all of us, to some degree, may be limited by our preconceived ideas, by our childhood of origin, by just not knowing that we're limited. We could be limited. And I wonder if that's a bit of the case in a lot of young pastors, young leaders, that feel a call to ministry and a call to do something great for God. I wonder at times if it's possible to, just from us not knowing or maybe other reasons, but is it possible to limit God based on our lack of capacity?
Absolutely. I believe that it is it's a practical reality that God is not going to bless some behavior. God's not going to bless sinful behavior.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
So, there's so many things that we can do that limit capacity. And then there are a lot of things that happen to us that can limit capacity. There are consequences of our own decisions. There's life circumstances that can limit our capacity. And I really believe that having an understanding of ourselves, having an understanding of that purpose I talked about, and how these circumstances in life, the things that happen to us that are not our fault, things that life just deals to us, or the consequences that are the result of our own bad decisions that we can make, that ultimately how we respond to those things can determine whether that becomes a limiting factor or something that actually propels us into greater capacity. The same situation, these same circumstances can affect two people very differently. One person can look at it as an absolute barrier to moving forward and increase capacity. Another person could look at that same situation as a stepping stone, and they use it. They climb over it. They bust through it. They do something that makes them stronger and better. And so, absolutely, life circumstances, our upbringing, our family, circumstances that happen to us. It could be sickness. It could be a loss of a job, a loss of a family member, dealing with that grief, all of those kind of things that can happen to us that can limit our capacity depending on how we respond to it, how we navigate that. Or we can embrace those things and understand that all things can work together for good, that God can actually use this to stretch me. I think we probably should be careful to make sure that we're ready to pray that prayer of Jabez, expand my territory, because God uses a variety of methods and means to stretch us, and stretching is typically not comfortable. And so be careful when you pray that prayer, God, increase my capacity, expand my territory, because God just might answer your prayer, but maybe not in the way, the process that you thought it would happen. And a lot of times we can go through some really challenging things that God will use to increase our capacity.
Yeah. So in regards to you had mentioned earlier in the conversation about vision and how vision plays a role in the capacity and being able to see something, and we were just talking about how sometimes that's a limiting thing. We can't see beyond our circumstances, or we allow those circumstances, as you mentioned, to stop us. Instead of hurtling over it or climbing over it, we allow it to stop us. So hopefully in this podcast, there's somebody out there that will listen to this and begin to realize that there is greater capacity in that person's life. And so if they somehow, some way catch a vision between these two podcasts on capacity of something greater in their life, being able to increase the capacity within them, how would you, from a practical standpoint, what would you do? What would you recommend to them to increase or to enlarge their capacity?
Well, I'm very passionate about this. As a leader, as a pastor, I think it's what we are called to do, is to help others to take a concept and make practical application and live it out. It's what we do every Sunday when we preach, or as a leader, maybe in an organization where you're casting vision, and that vision has to become more than just a philosophical destination, that we've got to make practical application. I've heard this analogy used before, that principles are like fence posts, and that application are like the rails of that fence. And so it takes both of those together in order to be effective. And just kind of bridging from what we were just talking about, as far as maybe capacity limiting factors and people moving forward into the practical application and growth and personal development, there's nothing more disappointing, or I would just say frustrating, even as a leader. And one of the greatest tragedies is to see a person who has high potential but very low capacity. And it's so sad to see that. And we've all probably been there in our lives, and we've seen others that were there, where we looked at them and just realized they have so much more potential, but the capacity of their lives right now is limiting them. And it's creating a roadblock to growth. And so I would say, from a practical standpoint, the first thing we have to do is just begin to understand ourselves and what our current capacity is, and understanding purpose and that future potential. And I think there's a lot of great resources out there. Getting a coach in your life that will help you, and having that different perspective from somebody else that can look at you and help you to see yourself. And there's a big difference between being self-aware and being self-consumed. And you talk about a capacity enabling or capacity limiting factor. This is it. So as we start to talk about practical things about capacity, we need to be able to see ourselves and understand ourselves within this concept. But if we are completely self-consumed with this concept, where it's all about us and the purpose never goes beyond that, then that will be a limiting factor, and we're never able to move forward and increase our capacity. But if we can have self-awareness without being self-consumed, then that is a powerful place to be. And as I've continued on this journey of pursuing capacity, I felt like God gave me an equation, you could call it, when it comes to understanding capacity. It was a way for me to kind of analyze where I was, to have some self-awareness and understand my current capacity, but also a way to set goals moving forward toward the fulfillment of potential. So I believe that capacity is the sum of 6 elements of personal growth potential. So this is that equation. Capacity equals the sum of 6 elements of personal growth potential. Those 6 elements are the spiritual, the mental, emotional, physical, relational, and financial. So these 6 elements.
Say that covers it all.
This is nothing, this is nothing new. This is no great revelation, really. And as I said before, I had prayed through these 6 areas. Every day for years and years, I would pray through these 6 areas, but that's all I did with them. And I'd pray, God, help me with any spiritual battles, or, mentally just have, clarity of mind and peace of mind, and emotionally, just God, help me. I want my heart to be right. And I want to have, joy and the fruit of the Spirit at work in my life. And God, physically, just strength and health, and relationally, pray through my relationships, and financially for your provision. I would pray through these 6 things, but I never really put them into a framework of practical application. And that was where capacity really crystallized for me, that, okay, so this is more than just praying through these 6 areas. These are 6 elements of personal growth potential. I can grow in these 6 areas. I can become better. I can become more effective. And when you look at the sum of those 6 elements, then that ultimately is going to equal my capacity and my future potential.
I love I love having something to basically assess yourself as to where your capacity is. And you said something a few minutes ago that really hit home for me, that your self-awareness is not the same as being self-consumed. In fact, I have found that in my life, the more self-aware that I become in these 6 categories, for instance, the less consumed I have to be with myself. Like if I'm not aware of those things, then I find myself, kind of living in my own head and not as worried about people around me, and more consumed with stress and anxiety, because I am not as aware of what's going on inside of me. But the more I get emotionally aware, the more I get mentally aware, or, physically what's going on in my body, relationally in tuned, then that allows me to, each one of those 6 areas, it allows me to sort of step outside of myself at that point, because I know where I stand. I know where I'm at. So now I can go and focus on those around me and really pay attention to the people that the Lord places in my path. Do you find that would be the case for you?
Absolutely. It's so true. And it's such an interesting paradox, which so much of Scripture is this paradox, that really doesn't make sense. That if you want to be the greatest, you have to be the least. And, it's this concept that it's like, okay, the more I know myself and the more I'm self-aware, the less I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to be released. It's this liberating factor. I can be released to focus on others and to help others. And I can be okay with who I am.
Exactly.
This self-awareness doesn't mean I've got all of these areas perfected. Doesn't mean I've figured it all out and I'm this perfect human being. So now I'm fixed and I can go fix everybody else. No, a self-awareness it's a matter of killing our flesh and embracing humility. And that's probably another way to define it, that humility is actually self-awareness that says, I'm okay with not being perfect. I'm human. I'm going to rely on God and others to make up for my weaknesses and areas where I'm insufficient. But pride is about being self-consumed. And there's two sides of pride. There's one side that says, I've got it all together. I don't need God. There's another side of pride that says, I don't have anything together and God doesn't need me. That's pride. That's this being self-consumed so much that all you see are your flaws, and then it renders you ineffective to help anybody else.
Yeah. I was thinking about, as you were saying that, it came to mind, part of my, I guess my greatest risk or challenges in life, or when I get tired and stressed, I get moody. I will, sort of detach from people, and I'll get and I'll find myself getting moody, and my family gets the brunt end of that a lot of times. So I'll come home and and they will get the negative side of me because I kind of let my hair down. I don't reel that back as much when I'm in my home. But the self-awareness part of that allows me to say, okay, Ryan, you just had a tough conversation at work. You had a long day. You've had several counseling appointments. You're drained. You're tired. Ryan, you're feeling a little bit grumpy right now. So you need to reel that back. So I can sit in my truck and I can be aware of that, and I can reel that back within me. And then I could walk into my home and not allow my family to experience that moody side of me. I can purposely be aware and make a change, and absolutely 100% has increased the positive relationships in my life. It's allowed me to be able to be with my family, be more present with my family when I am home. And you can just repeat that conversation over and over again with church relationships or things of that nature. It's to be self-aware opens the door to minister and be with relationships in my life in a way that I can't if I'm not self-aware.
It's so powerful. It's so liberating to have that understanding.
Absolutely. So, Ryan,
let me just add one thing here. I feel like this is an important point here, which, we could take the time to break each of these 6 areas down. You could do a whole podcast on each one, but I think it's important to understand how connected each of these 6 areas are. If you're having financial troubles, you're going to be very worried. You're not going to have peace of mind. If you're having relationship issues, your emotions are going to be a wreck. If you're not where you need to be spiritually, then you're not going to have healthy relationships. All of it is so interconnected. And I think a principle for me that has become very important is understanding that I need to place emphasis in each of these 6 areas. Now, it may not be equal emphasis, and certainly not all the time. In fact, at certain times, one will be prioritized above another, but it is important to be intentional in each of these 6 areas. If I'm not taking care of myself physically, I'm not getting proper rest and diet and exercise, then it doesn't matter how spiritual I am, or I may have the whole Bible memorized, but I'm not going to be able to use it in ministering to others if physically I'm not taking care of myself and I can't get out of bed. And I understand there are physical
So true.
challenges that we don't choose, things that happen to us we can't control. We understand that. But if I'm doing things that are detrimental to my health that I could stop, then I'm responsible. I'm limiting my capacity. And I really believe if you examine these 6 areas and you could maybe put it into a graph and evaluate your life, where am I on a scale of 1 to 10 in each of these areas? And you start writing down those numbers, that if there's any area that's kind of out of balance, that's maybe a really low number on that scale, it becomes the lowest common denominator that limits effectiveness in every other area.
Good point.
And so
Yeah.
this was a powerful principle for me, that I need to make sure that I'm taking care of each of these areas, and I don't let one area get out of balance, because it tends to affect the other areas. And if there's one that's really low and suffering, it's going to lower the effectiveness of all the other areas. And it becomes the lowest common denominator that's going to affect every area of my life. So we have to look at these 6 elements as very interconnected and how they affect each other, and make sure that we're placing great emphasis in each of those areas.
Is there a particular method that you evaluate yourself with these? Like, do you do it every few months, every month, every week, or is there a particular method that you do, or just, as it comes to mind, ever so often you will kind of check through that in your life?
I certainly use it as an annual goal setting tool, as I'm thinking about the next year, and I'm evaluating the past year and looking forward and creating some goals moving forward. So I will categorize some of those goals within these 6 elements. So what am I going to do when it comes to my spiritual growth this year? A commitment to maybe increasing my personal devotion, or reading through the Bible this year. I don't read through the Bible every single year. Sometimes I'll take portions of scripture and do more of a slow read. But this current year, that was a goal for me, to read through the Bible. And so, mentally, what am I going to do this year to increase my mental capacity? Books that I read, or courses that I take, or a degree that I pursue. Maybe I'm going to learn a new language. I think these kind of things are when I talk about mental capacity. And I understand that when it comes to mental and emotional health, that some of those things are very, very related. But when I think of mental in this element of capacity, it's what am I going to do to increase my education for mental clarity? How am I going to increase that capacity? So emotional, what am I going to do to be intentional about emotional health? And so setting some goals there of making sure that I'm incorporating things into my life that will add some virtue, and that will make sure that I'm keeping an emotional balance. Physical exercise. Now, everybody sets New Year's resolutions just about for physical exercise and things they're going to do. But that's an easy one to say, okay, I'm going to work out 3 or 4 days a week, or 30 minutes a day, or setting those kind of things. Relationships. What am I going to do to work on my relationships, to better my marriage, to better my relationship with my children, to invest more in my leaders within my church, or creating connections outside the church so that I can be a disciple maker. And then financially, it's okay to set some financial goals. That's not being non-spiritual. It's okay to plan for the future and to plan ahead. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. I don't think he was saying, don't think about tomorrow. It's okay to plan for tomorrow. Just don't worry. If tomorrow and your finances are consuming your thoughts, then you're out of balance in that area, if it's hindering your effectiveness in other areas. But it's okay to plan and make some financial goals. And if your purpose is, God, I want to be blessed.
You want.
Exactly. You got to plan. And if your motive is to be a blessing and to bless others and bless the kingdom, then it's all right. God will bless you, and he'll allow that flow of resources through you. So I use it as an annual goal setting structure and tool. And then I will refer back to that. I don't have a set like quarterly or monthly, but I will refer back to those goals periodically throughout the year. And especially as I feel it and feel necessary that I need to kind of reevaluate where am I, check up on my progress, and I'll do that. But every single day as I pray and I start my day and do my devotion, I will think about these 6 areas. So I try to make it a daily practice and to just think about, okay, spiritually, where am I? Mentally, emotionally, physically, what am I doing today? Relationally, financially. Okay. Just even thinking through those things, it may not even take more than a minute, but just kind of touching on those topics every day in my prayer and devotion time just helps me to keep my eyes on the prize and just stay focused daily.
That's a great practice. And so we evaluate ourselves if we're low in an area of relationships, like maybe I need to work on my marriage a bit. Maybe that would include getting a book, Boundaries on Marriage, or Love and Respect, or some good marriage book. Maybe it would be getting an accountability partner to help me stay accountable to focusing on daily conversations with my spouse or whatever. Maybe it's hiring a counselor. Maybe it's hiring a coach. Whatever area, whatever you lack, I'm hearing you say, get really practical with it. Do some things that can really, essentially practical increase of capacity, not just prayer, but actually doing some things that are going to spend your hard-earned money to grow in these areas, right?
That's it. And I think I'll just add this, Ryan, as we kind of wrap up the practical application here. I think there is this tension between capacity and potential. There's a relational tension here. And part of this self-awareness that I think is important is one concept that seems to be one of those keywords being thrown around today is talking about burnout and especially in leadership burnout is a big thing. But I think that it is possible for us to attempt to increase our capacity beyond our potential. If capacity starts to outpace our potential, then we enter into a place of burnout. And so I think there should be this relational tension where our potential is always out there just beyond us. And keeping these 6 areas in balance is very important because, as I said, I mean, I could be more spiritual. I could pray more. I could read my Bible through every month. I could be more spiritual, but I probably would lose my marriage and wouldn't have a relationship with my kids, and I couldn't pastor a church. And I could be more educated. I mean, I could go out there and get 3 doctorates right now. But again, I'd probably lose all those same things, and I wouldn't have a life. So there has to be a balance in these areas, and I cannot allow any area of capacity to outpace my potential. If I'm pushing beyond that margin, then I'm in a dangerous place spiritually. And I think it all comes back to that self-awareness and understanding that I can't push that area of capacity beyond my potential, or it's going to cause some serious issues in my life.
That's so good. I'm glad that you brought that out, because we can't outpace our capacity. Our capacity can outpace our potential. Yeah. So one more time, can you name those 6 things for the audience that they would want to pay attention to?
And I would say, Ryan, I have these in a particular order for me, and maybe somebody would reorder it a different way, but I think everything starts with the spiritual. There's nothing more important than that. They're not 100%. In an order. They're not in an order of importance, but I think they're in a progressive kind of order that to me is important. It starts with the spiritual. That's our devotion and the connection with God, our worship. And then the mental, what we think about, the things that we read, the video and media that we consume, and the people that we're around are influencing our thoughts, which ultimately will influence our emotions. It's going to determine what we feel. And then the physical is not just exercise and rest and diet, but it's kind of bigger than that. It's what we do in the natural, the physical. It's our body, and what we do matters. And what we think about and what we feel ultimately is going to determine what we say and what we do. And so there's this progression, and then how that relates to all of our relationships: spouse, kids, boss, leader, followers, church members, community, all of our most important relationships. So how each of those first four areas ultimately influence that relational area. And then to me, the financial element almost seems a little bit out of place, maybe in the context of these other things that seem really kind of big and important, but we just understand that finances matter. And first of all, our faithfulness in our finances, it absolutely matters that we're being obedient to biblical principles. But we understand that life is dependent upon financial stewardship and our ability to manage those things, whether it's in providing for our family or blessing the kingdom or building a business or any of those areas, that we understand that finances are so key. And I believe that this particular area, it's going to affect all the others. Because if I'm so far in debt that I've got to work 3 jobs, well, talk about limiting capacity. I've rendered myself ineffective in my relationships, in the kingdom of God, in ministry.
Great.
So that's the 6 areas. One more time: spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, relational, and financial.
Yeah. And they are absolutely hand in glove. Now, if you had to rate one above the other, obviously spiritual, you can't make it without the spiritual side of things. But great point in that if you're lacking in one of the others, it's gonna affect all of the others. So if you're lacking in financial, it's going to affect the other 5. If you're lacking in the emotional side of yourself, then it's going to affect the other 5. They work hand in glove, and we have to, we don't want to always focus on our weaknesses, but this is a case where you want to find your weakest place, and that's where you want to focus growth on. That's where you want to read. That's how you want to determine what the next book is that you read. That's how you want to determine what you want to spend your money on to personally grow in those areas. You want to grow your weakest place in these 6 areas. So I love that. With that, let's shift gears just a little bit. I have found that anytime that I feel myself in a place of growth, it's usually synonymous with pain. And I want to ask you, do you feel that same thing? And if so, how does that look in your life?
There is no doubt that pain is just one of life's greatest instruments of change.
How did I know that?
It just is a reality. And I think it's important for us to understand that we all deal with that you're not alone. Whoever you are that's listening to this right now, you are not alone. You're not the only person experiencing pain. We all experience pain, and at times greater than at others. We're not saying that all of life is pain. No, but it's a consistent, not a constant, but a consistent element of life that pain will come, painful circumstances, things that will happen. And whether it's a consequence of our own decisions or a consequence of somebody else's decision, or life just happens to us, and life brings a lot of things to us that we don't deserve or didn't do anything to deserve it, don't understand it, but it just happens. And so understanding this, that I'm not alone, I'm not the only one, that this is a fact of life. In this life, you will have tribulation, Jesus said. And if we want to grow, if we want to better ourselves and increase our capacity, growth requires change, and change is uncomfortable for all of us. Like that stretching I was talking about earlier. Jabez prayed that prayer, expand my territory. Well, that expansion, that stretching process is going to be uncomfortable. And any kind of change, any kind of transition in life creates stress. There is this inherent pressure that is necessary in order to grow or change. In fact, any kind of movement requires friction. You cannot move without friction. Now, here in Ohio, You guys don't get this as often down there. Every once in a while, you'll get a good ice storm in Louisiana, but we get ice and snow, and if there's a quarter inch of ice that's just falling out there on the pavement, and you come tearing out of your driveway, you're going to discover very quickly that friction is important when it comes to movement. And when you don't have friction, you don't have control, and you can't move forward, and you will have a wreck. And so it's okay to have a little bit of friction. That's necessary for movement. The same is true of growth. There's going to be some pain, some uncomfortable moments that are required in order for us to grow and to experience positive change. We're going to feel it. And now where that can get into a danger zone is that friction can also cause fire. It can cause an explosion if there's too much friction. So that's when it gets into an unhealthy place. We talk a lot about team environment and having healthy tension or tension to be managed. And those are all good things within a team, but we understand if there gets to be too much friction within that team, it can explode. And so self-awareness, understanding that some of that pain is okay if it's moving us forward toward growth. Now, if we enter into that zone where the pain becomes an inhibitor, it's decreasing my capacity, that's where we have to get help. It's okay to say, I'm not okay. We have to talk to a counselor. We've got to talk to a friend. We need somebody to help us. But there's no doubt that absolutely growth and increase in capacity, it may be painful.
So with that said, Michael, me and Adam and you were obviously grappling with capacity at the same time. And I know in my life and Adam, speaking to him, I know in his life, there was some things going on, at the time that were painful and that kind of threw us into that place of seeking, figuring out how to grow our capacity to move out of that. And it was a painful process, but you personally, a few years ago, what did that look like for you personally? If you don't mind me asking, was that an intense time for you, or was the Lord just truly just speaking to you in prayer?
It was a very, very intense time. And I was probably coming out of the most intense season of my life. And in some ways, the most painful. There were some really painful things that had happened. So it was spring of 2018 when we were having these conversations, which is kind of hard to believe that it's been that many years ago. But when I first started really being consumed with this concept of capacity, so the spring of 2018, I had not yet been pastoring a year. So I had just come out of this really intense time of transition. I'd spent 17 years in youth ministry and had served in a local church, had served in district and North American levels of organizational leadership. And it felt like for those 17 years that my life was moving forward toward this kind of singular destination. I was involved in youth ministry and was very fortunate, blessed to have the opportunity to work at our national headquarters and to be a part of that environment there and work with some great teams. But it felt like my life had been very focused in one area. And then 2017, we're transitioning out of youth ministry and organizational leadership into the local level to pastor an incredible church, Christian Life Center here in Heath. Not only did we just celebrate our 5th pastoral anniversary this year, but 75th anniversary for our church. So a long history and legacy of apostolic leadership and effectiveness in the community here. But the church had experienced a tremendous tragedy and loss. Their pastor had passed away at the age of 44, had passed away tragically just the year before I came as pastor. And so not only am I going through this really intense season of transition from organizational leadership, we had just experienced North American Youth Congress 2017, 34,000 people at Youth Congress in Indianapolis. And what felt like just incredible success and a lot of great things happening there. And now we're just completely shifting gears. This is not like going from one chapter to the next in your life. This is like a whole new book that we're starting. This is not just a chapter change. So it's a whole new book. It's a major life transition. I'm from Texas. My wife is from Seattle, Washington. We'd been in Texas for 10 years as a married couple, then St. Louis for 8 years. And now we're moving again. We're moving from St. Louis, Missouri to the Columbus, Ohio area. So that's a big change. We're changing our role. We're coming into a church that just needs the strength and comfort of God. They've suffered this incredible loss, and it would be natural, just our own human inclination to wonder, God, where are you in this? A church that loses their spiritual leader. And so just so many questions and that grief that people are dealing with. And right in the middle of that, as we begin the process, in fact, the day that we closed on our home in Ohio, we were driving back to St. Louis, and we get a call from my wife's parents in Seattle. And they're on the phone. They just left the doctor's office, and they let us know that my father-in-law had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So here we are in this biggest transition of our lives. It's already intense. I was just starting my third year. I took kind of a slow track. I was in a 4-year pace at UGST, taking 2 classes a semester. And so I was just starting my third year at UGST in the master's program. We're making this transition in from one state to another, but also in ministry focus. And we get this word that Rebecca's dad has stage 4 cancer. And so that was the middle of September in 2017. And we started making as many trips as we could there to Seattle to see her family and spend some time with her dad. We took at least one trip a month, September, October, November, and ended up on December 1st. Her father passed away just a couple of months after being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so here we are. Not only was it an intense stretch and season of life, but now we enter into this incredible couple of days. On December 1st, her father passes away in Seattle. We're here December 2nd and 3rd. We had our pastoral installation here in Ohio. On December 4th, we fly to Seattle. On the 5th, I preach her dad's funeral there. And we fly December 6th back to St. Louis. They have a going away reception for us to just kind of end our tenure in time there serving in UPCI youth ministries. And we flew home the very next day. So in the space of 7 days, just this incredibly intense time of emotions and extremes of emotions, from death and installation services and this celebration at headquarters. Yeah.
Wow.
Was just
that's amazing. Lots of pain in the middle of all that. There's celebrating pieces to that, and that's the way life usually comes at us. There's good and bad parts of it, but man, right in the middle of that 1 week, you had such a vast array of emotions, you and Rebecca, I would imagine, just such a vast array of emotions.
Yeah, it was something that we look back on later, and you kind of wonder, how did we make it through that? How did we survive that week? It was just incredible. And so, we go into this new year, and here we are embracing this exciting new opportunity, but I think probably carrying the wounds and the pain of that intense season that didn't just go away because the calendar turned to a new year. And, we're a couple of months into that next year when I had that conversation with Brother Gleason. And I'm very confident in the providential timing there, that coming out of that intense time of pain and still carrying some of those wounds, that it was there that God helped me to understand capacity and what I needed to do at that point to move forward and to really have some practical tools that would help me move forward. I probably very easily could have gotten stuck right there
Yeah.
in some kind of vicious cycle of wrestling with this pain and never being able to move beyond it. And I think I was ready, maybe because of the pain. I was open to this concept, but it wasn't just an openness, and it wasn't just the right timing. It was what I needed to then heal and move beyond where I was at that moment.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's an amazing few months that you had of stress, of anxiety, of loss, pain, hurt, excitement mixed into that. Just a whirlwind of emotion, and it sounds like you probably could have went a lot of different ways. When you're in a whirlwind, you can go a lot of different ways with that. And the Lord sent someone, a voice into your life, Brother Gleason, that sort of steered you in the right direction, a mentor in your life that steered you in the right direction. And which, let me just point out, that's the power of relationships in our life. We need relationships in our life, because we're all going to end up in a whirlwind, maybe not as crazy as the whirlwind that you were in those few months, but we're all going to end up in whirlwinds at times. And we need people in our life to be able to speak into our life. So thank you for sharing that and what led up to your deep dive into capacity. What is God presently doing in your life in regards to increasing your capacity? What's next for you?
Well, I think as I get older, life just brings perspective, and maturity takes time. Time doesn't always equal maturity, but maturity does take time, and you have to live a little bit. And so I think as I get older, the more important things in life just become more apparent. And there's nothing more important than our relationships. And for me, that can be a little bit of a challenge because of my makeup and who I am, my sociability, and some of the things that I have to kind of work on and fight against, the resistance in my own flesh. And so it's one of those things as far as relationships, just being a better husband, being a better father.
When you say sociability, let me just stop you there. Do you mean what type of sociability? Are you an introvert, extrovert, ambivert?
I am more of an introvert, and which is interesting to me, being in the role of pastor and being more of an introvert, and even being more of a laid back kind of style and personality. I feel like some of my traits in leadership and in some of those areas of ministry have been learned or even forced, that it's one of those things that I have to kind of push myself to engage on a relational level, to force myself to be a little bit vulnerable or transparent. That certainly doesn't come natural to me. And so I have to work hard at that. And that impacts my relationship with my wife and my kids. And I have to work on that. And probably when I was younger and less self-awareness and less maturity and not understanding those things, probably didn't always place the priority and emphasis in those areas that I needed to force myself to connect on more of a relational level.
Yeah, that's good. So he's pushing you, Lord's pushing you to increase your capacity of how you interact in those close relational aspects of life. That's very good. Anything else before we move on to our last question?
Absolutely. I really think that something that I'm very passionate about is pouring myself into others and developing leaders, building teams. It's something I've always loved. And you talk about increasing capacity, not just by addition, but multiplication. When you start pouring yourself into others, then that impact and investment and influence that begins to live through them. So I really think our connection with others is this really key element. We could go back to 2 Kings 4, and it's outside the house. It's the vessels that they went and acquired. That somebody can spend a whole lifetime to understand a concept that they write into a book that I can read in 2 hours. So I've just increased my capacity by the span of a lifetime in 2 hours. Or I can invest in a relationship in somebody that will go on to do bigger and greater and better things than I ever did. And I've increased my capacity. If I do that 10 times, then those 10 individuals that go out. And so that's the power of that connection with others and those relational influences that exponentially increases our capacity. So that's something, developing leaders. Another thing is not just reading books, but writing books. And this is a desire of mine to write books. My grandfather, J.R. Ensey, is a prolific author, and he's always challenged me to write. He would say, if you want to do something that's going to live beyond you, then write books, and those principles and life experience will live beyond you. So I'm working on my first book right now. My second book, actually, I'm hoping to write on capacity. So I'm going to put this out there. I'm accountable. It's public. I've said it. That's my next book. I want to write on capacity and potential.
It's ironic. Adam mentioned the same thing. He's wanting to write a book, and he's putting it out there, and he's getting accountability. So I love it. And I told him, awesome. And I'll tell you, I'll be one of the first to make that purchase and read that, because I know the quality of work that you produce. So that's tremendous. So a question that I'd like to end on, and this doesn't have to be related to, it can be, but it doesn't have to be related to the topic we're discussing here. But what's one thing you wish that you could tell your younger self?
Man, we could talk for a long time here. I'm sure to think about all the things that I wish my younger self had known. And man, I think I would have been dangerous if I could go back and share some of that information with myself. But the first thing I think I'd say is don't wait 16 years after you get your undergrad degree to start working on your master's degree. Just don't do that. Start sooner. Oh,
I did that. And I agree.
That was a challenge when you're just in the middle of life and ministry and family and everything else going on in your world. So get that degree sooner. And it was a goal all along, but I waited a long time to finally act on it. Never thought I was going to have time.
Agree. Yeah.
I was waiting until I had more time and realized, okay, that's never going to happen. So it's never going to happen. You just have to start. But I would say just, and this is a little bit maybe of self-awareness and self-revelation here, but as a recovering perfectionist, I would tell my younger self that you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect.
That's good. Can you say that one more time to the young perfectionist that may be listening right now?
You don't have to be perfect. Nobody's asking you to be perfect. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect. God's not expecting you to be perfect. And I think just in my younger years, there were so many probably self-inflicted wounds and challenges and things that limited my capacity as a teenager, young adult, that didn't have to be, but I put so much pressure on myself, trying to acquire some level of perfection. I think it did a couple of things, couple of dynamics for me that really were created because of maybe just a misunderstanding of success and what life was all about, not understanding that I believe the biblical definition of success is faithfulness, not perfection. Yeah. In fact, the King James Version a lot of times will use the word perfect in the translation when it really is talking about maturity. It's talking about growth, having a growth mindset, moving in the right direction, but that doesn't mean you're not going to fall down a few times. And I'm a little bit competitive. I've been told that I have a little competitive streak in me.
I'd say you do.
I would say that about myself. So I am a little bit competitive, and it's something that's, I don't know, it affects me, I think, in every area of my life. If I'm on the golf course or the basketball court, or I'm in a boardroom or a meeting room, or if I'm preaching or whatever it is, leading people, I want to do my best. And sometimes that can be unhealthy, that competitive drive for perfection, especially. And And I think later on, I began to understand that I'm not in competition with anybody, that success equals fulfilling my potential. I'm not running anybody else's race. I've got a race that I'm supposed to run. And so I think this perceived need of perfectionism, it created a couple of negative dynamics for my life, that I'm at times being paralyzed by inaction due to a need or a desire that I want everything just to be perfect. And I couldn't act until couldn't move forward. But also, I think something that it caused me to do was just to bury some hurt and disappointment because of a fear of failure, and maybe a fear of disappointing others or being perceived as a failure, which really is just being self-consumed and a lot of pride, that I didn't want anybody to know that I was hurting or that I messed up. And if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would try to knock some sense into me to understand this, that I don't have to be perfect, and it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show some weakness. And I think God had to introduce some of that pain into my life to force me to work through some of those things that really were hindering my capacity. And it took some time, it took years really. And I'm still a work in progress, but thank God I'm further down the road than I was. And that's probably something that I would definitely go back and tell my younger self.
Well, I love that. That's tremendous, tremendous words on telling your younger self, but also just tremendous words throughout this interview. This has been really, really good. And thank you so much for the conversation for today and for your time. It's been such a privilege to have you on. And if you want to connect with Pastor Ensey, Michael Ensey, you are welcome to connect with him on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Michael Ensey, MichaelEnsey. I'll put that in the show notes. But be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can listen on YouTube. And also, it would make my day if you would take a minute and rate the show. My name is Ryan Franklin. Thank you so much for listening to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.